It's a simple question. It feels like it should have a simple answer. Was there ever just one human on Earth? The first one, a man or woman who is truly recognizably human, standing alone as the start of it all. Like a biological Adam or Eve, it's a powerful image. It's also completely wrong. The short answer is no. There was never a single first human. There was never a moment in time when a mother, who was not a human, gave birth to a child who was. That's not how evolution works. The real story is a lot messier, a lot slower, and in many ways a lot more interesting. It's a story about groups, not individuals. It's about changes so small you could never see them happen in one lifetime. To get your head around this, you have to stop thinking about species as fixed things with sharp edges. We like to put things in boxes. This is a dog, that is a cat, this is a chimpanzee. That is a human. In the present, that's easy enough. A human and a chimpanzee can't have offspring. They're clearly different species, but that clear line gets very blurry when you start looking back in time. Imagine a long, continuous road. You start walking. After one step, are you far from home? No. After 10 steps, still no. After 1,000 steps, maybe you're a few blocks away. You're not home anymore, but are you far? It's hard to say. At what exact step did you cross the line from near to far? There isn't one. It's a gradual change. You can point to the start and you can point to the end, but the transition is a smooth, unbroken process. Evolution is like that road. Every generation is just one tiny step. A child is born. It's a little different from its parents. Maybe its hair is a slightly different color. Maybe it's a tiny bit taller. Maybe a part of its brain that processes language is infinitesimally more complex. But it's still the same species as its parents. It can grow up and have children with others from its group. It belongs. Now imagine this happening over and over again, for thousands of generations, for hundreds of thousands of years. Each step is tiny, insignificant on its own. A child is always, without question, the same species as its mother and father. But if you could somehow take a person from 500,000 years ago and stand them next to a person from today, the differences would be obvious. They would be different species, but the line between them is made of millions of tiny, imperceptible steps. There is no single step that marks the change, so there was no first human because the process was too gradual. There was a population of pre-human ancestors. Let's call them something like late Homo erectus. This group of individuals lived, hunted, and bred together. Over a vast stretch of time, this entire population slowly changed. Natural selection favored certain traits. Maybe a slightly bigger brain helped in making better tools. Maybe a slightly different vocal cord structure allowed for more complex sounds, the precursor to language. Individuals with these tiny advantages were a little more likely to survive and have kids. Their kids inherited these traits. Over many generations, these traits became more common throughout the entire group. The whole population's average was shifting. The group was evolving. At no point did one of these Homo erectus mothers give birth to a Homo sapiens baby. She gave birth to a Homo erectus baby that was just a tiny bit different in a way that would eventually, thousands of years down the line, be part of the package we call Homo sapiens. Think of it like a color gradient. You have a strip that is pure blue on one end and pure green on the other. In the middle, it's a mix. Where does blue stop and green begin? You can't point to a single line. You can see the blue part, you can see the green part, but the transition is a smooth, continuous blend. Our evolution from an earlier species is that blend. We are the green end. Our ancestors say Homo heidelbergensis is the blue end. The millions of years in between are the blurry, blended part. We just slap a label on a section of that gradient and call it human for our own convenience. The very idea of a species is a human-made concept. It's a useful way to categorize life, but it has its limits, especially when you look at it through the lens of deep time. The definition we often use is the biological species concept. It says that if two organisms can breed and produce fertile offspring, they are the same species. A horse and a donkey can breed, but their offspring, a mule, is sterile, so they are different species. This works well for the here and now, but it breaks down with fossils. We can't test if a 100,000-year-old skeleton could have bred with a 150,000-year-old skeleton. So scientists who study fossils, paleoanthropologists, have to use a different method. They look at the physical form of the bones. They measure the skull size, look at the shape of the pelvis, the length of the leg bones. They are looking at the anatomy. When the anatomy of a group of fossils seems consistently different from an older group, they might give it a new species name. But this is an argument among experts. Some scientists look at a fossil and say, this is a late advanced Homo erectus. Another looks at the same fossil and says, no, this is an early primitive Homo sapiens. Who's right? They both are, in a way. They are just choosing to draw the line in a slightly different place on that long, gradual road. There is no biological reality to that line. It's a debate about classification, about where to put the label. This is why the question, who was the first human, is unanswerable. It depends on what you mean by human. Do you mean the first creature to be called Homo sapiens? If so, you are just talking about the first fossil that scientists agreed to put in that box. That fossil wasn't the first one. It was just an individual from a population that had been slowly evolving for a very long time. It had parents and grandparents and a whole community that looked pretty much just like it. And what about all the other kinds of humans? We tend to think of our own species, Homo sapiens, as the only kind of human. But the past was much more crowded. For a very long time, different human-like species, or hominins, walked the earth at the same time. There were the Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis in Europe and Asia. There were the Denisovans, who we only know about from a few tiny bones and a lot of DNA evidence. There were the little Homo floresienses in Indonesia, sometimes called hobbits. This makes the story even more complex. It wasn't a single straight line of one species evolving into the next. It was more like a branching bush. Some branches thrived for a while and then died out. Our branch, Homo sapiens, is the only one left, but we weren't always alone. And we even interacted with some of these other branches. We know from DNA evidence that many modern humans with ancestry outside of Africa have a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA. This means that at some point, our Homo sapiens ancestors met and had children with Neanderthals. So if a Homo sapiens and a Neanderthal could have a child, were they really different species? By the strict biological definition, maybe not. Maybe they were more like subspecies, the way a wolf and a dog are. It's messy, the lines are blurry. This interbreeding just further destroys the idea of a single first human of our kind emerging pure and separate from everything else. Our species' origin wasn't a clean birth. It was a long, tangled process of mixing and merging. But what about those famous scientific terms, Mitochondrial Eve and Y-chromosomal Adam? These sound a lot like a scientific first man and first woman. This is a very common and very understandable misunderstanding. The names are a bit misleading. They don't refer to the first two humans, or the only humans alive at the time. Let's start with Mitochondrial Eve. Mitochondria are the tiny powerhouses inside our cells. They have their own small loop of DNA, separate from the main DNA in the cell's nucleus. This mitochondrial DNA mtDNA is passed down only from the mother. Your father contributes none of your mtDNA. It comes directly from your mother, who got it from her mother, who got it from her mother, and so on, in an unbroken maternal line. Scientists can look at the mtDNA of people all over the world today. By comparing the tiny differences that have accumulated over time due to mutations, they can build a family tree. They can trace all these maternal lines backward in time, and if you go back far enough, all of those lines converge on a single woman. This woman is called Mitochondrial Eve. She is the most recent common maternal ancestor of all living humans. But here is the crucial part. She was not the first woman. She was not the only woman alive at her time. She lived in a population of thousands of other people, other women, and other men. She had parents. She had neighbors. She shopped at the same markets, metaphorically speaking. Other women were alive at the same time as her, and they also had children. It's just that their direct maternal lineages died out at some point. Imagine a group of 10 women living 200,000 years ago. All 10 have children. In the next generation, maybe one of them only has sons. Her mitochondrial line ends right there, because sons don't pass on mtDNA. Maybe another woman's descendants die out in a famine 1,000 years later. Another's line might end after 50,000 years for any number of reasons. Over a huge amount of time, due to pure chance, all the other maternal lines eventually hit a dead end. But the line from this one woman, Eve, never did. Every generation, at least one of her female descendants had a daughter, and that chain has remained unbroken all the way to the present day. So every single person alive today can trace their mother's line all the way back to this one individual. But she wasn't alone. She was just the lucky one, genetically speaking. Her maternal line survived. The others didn't. She is a mathematical convergence point, not a biological starting point. The same logic applies to Y-chromosomal Adam. The Y chromosome is what makes a male biologically male. It is passed down directly from father to son. By looking at the Y chromosomes of men around the world today, geneticists can trace their paternal lines backward in time. And just like with mtDNA, all those lines eventually converge on a single man. He is the most recent common paternal ancestor of all living men. And just like Eve, he was not the first man. He was not the only man. He lived in a thriving community of people. Other men were having sons, but over the long haul, their direct paternal lines eventually died out. Maybe a man had only daughters. His Y chromosome line ends. Maybe his descendants were wiped out in a conflict. Eventually, through sheer luck and statistics, only Adam's line survived to the present day. To make things even more confusing, mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam did not live at the same time. They weren't a couple. Current estimates place mitochondrial Eve as living around 150,000 to 200,000 years ago in Africa. Y chromosomal Adam is estimated to have lived much later, perhaps around 120,000 to 150,000 years ago, though these dates are always being revised as we get more data. So they were separated by thousands of years and were not part of some first human pair. They are simply the two individuals from a large ancient population whose specific genetic markers, one maternal and one paternal, happen to make it all the way down to every person living today. So if there wasn't a single first human, what was it like? What was the beginning really like? The best way to picture it is to imagine a group, a population, not a single person. Our species, Homo sapiens, emerged in Africa. The fossil and genetic evidence for this is overwhelming. There wasn't one place or one time. It was likely a process that happened across different populations spread over the continent. Imagine a network of early human groups, maybe a few dozen or a few hundred individuals in each. They were hunter-gatherers moving around the landscape. Sometimes these groups met. They exchanged ideas, tools, and genes. They were all slightly different. Maybe one group had a gene that gave them a slight advantage in dealing with a local disease. Maybe another group developed a slightly more efficient way to make spear points. Over tens of thousands of years, this collection of interconnected populations was the crucible of our species. The traits we now consider human, a large brain, a capacity for complex language, symbolic thought, art didn't appear overnight in one person. They emerged gradually across this network of people. A small mutation might pop up in one individual in one group that tweaked their brain wiring. If that tweak was beneficial, it would spread through that group and then, potentially, to other groups when they mixed. The birth of humanity was not a single event. It was a population-wide phenomenon. It was the slow, collective transformation of a whole group of ancestors. The first humans were not a couple. They were a community of several thousand individuals. At the very least, this is the minimum population size needed to avoid the dangers of inbreeding and maintain a healthy level of genetic diversity. A single pair would have been a genetic dead end. So, for our species to even survive, there had to be a group of them. This changes how we should think about our own origins. We aren't descended from a single heroic founder. We are descended from a community. Our deepest roots are in a collective. The very things that make us human, language, culture, cooperation, are all things that only make sense in the context of a group. You can't have language with just one person. You can't have culture with just one person. Our biology itself demanded a community from the very start. So, let's go back to the original question. Was there ever just one human on Earth? No. For biological reasons, it's an impossibility. For evolutionary reasons, it's a misunderstanding of the process. The reality is that there was a first population of humans, a group of a few thousand individuals in Africa who, as a whole, had crossed an invisible arbitrary line from being our ancestors to being us. They would not have known it. They were just living their lives. A mother held her baby and saw just a baby, not the future of a species. The child looked like her, like its father, like its cousins. The changes from one generation to the next were too subtle to notice. No one ever woke up and felt like a new species. No one would have looked at their parents and thought, they are the old kind, but I am the new kind. It just didn't happen that way. The idea of a single first human is a myth. It's a simple story that fits our human need for clear beginnings. We like stories with a clear protagonist, a starting point. The scientific story is less simple. It's a story of vast timescales, of populations, of genetic drift, and natural selection. It's a story of blurry lines and fuzzy definitions, but it's a story that the evidence tells us. Our origin is not a single point in time. It is a long, winding river of generations. We can't say where the river began, only that the water we are in now is different from the water far, far upstream. We are the product of an unbroken chain of life stretching back billions of years. The link in that chain that we might call the first human was never a single person. It was a whole people, and that, in its own way, is a more powerful origin story. We didn't start with one, we started together.